Hello everyone, welcome to the election feature. Big movement on the electoral map today. We are going to take a look at the 2024 election map based on the latest polls in all 50 states to see who is the favorite to win the election in November.
Donald Trump is reaching unprecedented levels in the latest 2024 election polls, making a serious bid to flip New York, a state that hasn't turned red since 1984. Kamala Harris is now on the verge of becoming the worst-performing Democrat in New York in nearly 40 years. Today, we're dissecting this explosive new data and what it means for the 2024 electoral map. If New York truly becomes competitive, we'll start with this groundbreaking poll from Siena College, a highly respected polling firm that often partners with the New York Times. This poll puts Harris at 55%, supposedly leading Trump by 13 points. On the surface, this might look like good news for Harris, but when you dig deeper and adjust for the partisan weighting of Democrats, Republicans, and independents, the numbers tell a different story. The poll oversampled Democrats significantly, with 49% of respondents identifying as Democrats, 25% as Republicans, and 24% as independents. In reality, New York's voter base is much more evenly split, with Democrats only holding a narrow lead. Once we correct for this imbalance, Trump's support jumps to 48%, while Harris drops to 49%. Her once commanding 12-point lead vanishes, leaving her with a razor-thin 1% edge, well within the margin of error. This isn't the first time polls have dramatically overstated Democratic strength. In 2020, Joe Biden was predicted to dominate New York by 29.4%, with many forecasts showing him surpassing 30% throughout October. It seemed plausible. After all, Hillary Clinton won the state by nearly 23 points, and Obama by 28 in 2012. But despite the deepening polarization of 2012 American politics, New York, a traditionally solid blue state, failed to shift further left when the entire nation moved leftward from 2016 to 2020. Biden barely improved on Clinton's performance, showing a significant weakening of the Democratic grip on states once considered safely in their corner. Turning to the poll results, Kamala Harris leads by 13 points. However, it's important to recognize that this is based on a highly skewed sample. When we factor in the margin of error from 2020, which hovered around 6 to 7 points, her 13-point advantage shrinks down to just 6 points. A 6-point margin in New York would be catastrophic for Harris and the Democratic Party, effectively making New York far more competitive than states like Texas or Florida. Remember, Florida was decided by a narrow margin just 2 election cycles ago. In fact, Donald Trump could very well secure larger victories in states like North Carolina and Georgia than Harris would in New York. Now let's look at a scenario where New York does indeed become a competitive battleground. I'll begin by marking the solid states for both candidates. If New York is in play, Harris isn't going to be winning Washington and Oregon by the usual 15-point margins. In reality, her solid states would narrow down to California, Hawaii, and a few northeastern strongholds like Vermont, Massachusetts, Maryland, D.C., and Maine's 1st District. On the other side, Trump will have solid wins in Utah, Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, the Dakotas, most of Nebraska, and states like Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, Indiana, South Carolina, Alaska, and Maine's 2nd District. In this situation, we should also consider Iowa, which has leaned more conservative than Ohio in recent years. While I still see Trump winning Ohio comfortably by a double-digit margin, it's likely to fall just shy of 15 points if New York turns competitive. Iowa, however, is a different story. This state has been on the verge of becoming solid red for quite some time. It's generally more conservative than Ohio, and in this scenario, I project Trump would win Iowa by a solid 15-point margin. Before we dive into the battleground states, let's take a closer look at the other polls released from New York. The most recent one we've reviewed is from Siena College, showing Harris with a 13-point lead. A poll from ActiVote a few weeks ago had her up by 17 points, which is pretty solid, but that's the best result she's seen so far in the 2024 election cycle. The previous Siena College poll, taken right after Harris became the presumptive Democratic nominee, had her ahead by 12 points, exactly the same as now. Over the past 2 months, she hasn't gained any ground in what should be a solid blue state. Why did she need to improve? It comes down to how poorly Joe Biden was performing before he stepped aside. In Siena College's June poll, Biden had only an 8-point lead. In fact, 3 consecutive polls showed Biden leading by less than 10 points in a state he won by 23 points just 4 years earlier. The decline in support for Democrats here has been remarkable. Back then, New York wasn't even part of the conversation. It was assumed to be a lock for the Democrats. When the results came in, people were surprised at how close it was, even though Biden still won comfortably. The expectation, however, was that he'd win by a much larger margin. Now, the polls suggest that Democrats won't even secure a solid victory. Over the past year, only 2 polls have shown the party ahead by 15 points or more. One recent poll had Harris up by 17 points, and another back in May had Biden ahead by 19. That was before his disastrous debate performance. From here, New York is likely to become even more competitive. Harris hasn't made any gains in support over the last 2 months. And as New York becomes more of a battleground, other states, especially in the Northeast, will likely follow suit. We're also seeing a tight race in New Jersey, largely due to the scandal involving Senator Bob Menendez. Now let's look at the likely states for both candidates. These states will be won by a margin of 7 to 15 points. Kamala Harris is set to take states like Washington and Oregon. Donald Trump is the clear frontrunner in Ohio, where he's expected to win by around 10 to 15 points. He's going to dominate Ohio, which was once a battleground, particularly back in 2012, when Obama took it by 3% over Mitt Romney, even though Obama secured 332 electoral votes in total. When Trump came in, he won Ohio by a much wider margin, despite ending up with only 306 electoral votes. Ohio has clearly shifted to the right. In both Iowa and Ohio, the Republican governors were re-elected in 2022 by solid margins, showing the strength of the GOP in these areas. Looking at the map now, Ohio and Iowa have essentially become free states for Republicans. Back in 2016, they were considered competitive, as they had been in 2012. But today, there's no doubt they will strongly back Trump. Moving on to Florida, with its 30 electoral votes, a state that used to be right in the middle in 2012 and 2016, it was decided by a tilt margin. However, in 2020, Trump outperformed expectations. The polls had him losing Florida, but instead he not only won, but did better than he had against Hillary Clinton. Now, like Ohio and Iowa, Florida isn't competitive anymore. It's basically a guaranteed win for Trump. These are electoral votes that were hotly contested just 4 years ago, but are now firmly in his corner. Then we have Texas, a long-standing Republican stronghold. While the state is gradually leaning more to the left, flipping Texas for the Democrats will be a massive challenge. They need to convert millions of voters to pull off a win, and that's going to take a long time. Texas remains one of the most conservative states in the country, and it's set to vote for Trump for the 3rd time straight. Now let's talk about the lean states, those that will be decided by margins of just 2 to 5 points. These are among the most fiercely contested battlegrounds in the country, and New York is now on that list. While Kamala Harris is still likely to win the state, it's going to be far tighter than the Democrats are used to. According to Polymarket's 2024 election odds, Democrats have a 97% chance of holding on to New York, but don't be fooled. This number only tells us who will scrape through in the end. Right now, Democrats are still the favorites. But if New York turns into a real battleground, it spells nothing short of a disaster for them in other states. Let's be real. If Democrats can barely survive in New York, how do they think they'll manage in states like New Jersey, Minnesota, Virginia, or New Hampshire, places that are far more competitive than New York's liberal fortress? The truth is, New York has been growing more competitive with each passing year. Look at 2022. The governor's race between Kathy Hochul and Lee Zeldin was decided by less than 7 points. This wasn't just close. It was the tightest gubernatorial race in New York since 1994, and the weakest showing for Democrats since 1982. and it wasn't just the governor's race. That same year, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer limped to re-election with a margin under 15 points against Joe Pinion. This is a man who once won with 70% of the vote in 2016. The fact that Schumer, New York's most powerful Democrat, couldn't secure a solid win shows just how much ground Democrats are losing. It's no secret New York Democrats are in disarray. Cuomo's resignation after Biden took office left a power vacuum. Kathy Hochul stepped in, but let's face it, she's barely holding on, as her weak 2022 re-election victory proved. She only won because she's a Democrat, not because of overwhelming support. And the chaos doesn't stop there. New York City Mayor Eric Adams is facing his own scandals and is currently under investigation, which only adds to the dysfunction. Democrats have mismanaged New York, and now it's blowing up in their faces. Along with New York, we have New Jersey slipping into the lean blue category. Senator Bob Menendez is a major liability for the party, and the race in New Jersey is set to be more competitive than it's been in decades. Then there's Colorado with its 10 electoral votes. While Kamala Harris is still favored to win the state, Biden carried it by 13 points, and it's likely to tighten if New York falls into the lean category. If the Democrats struggle in New York, they could find themselves fighting to hold on to Colorado too. Meanwhile, on the Republican side, Trump is poised to dominate nearly every swing state by at least 2 points. North Carolina and Georgia are two prime examples. Both were incredibly close last time, but if New York is in play, Trump will likely secure North Carolina for the third time and flip Georgia back from the Democrats. Georgia, the closest state in 2020, and Arizona, another razor-thin state, will likely swing to Trump by over 2 points. Both Arizona and Georgia are historically conservative, with the last time they voted blue before 2020 being the 1990s, 1996 for Arizona, and 1992 for Georgia. These states haven't turned liberal overnight, and they're poised to return to their conservative roots. While Biden performed well in 2020, Kamala Harris is highly unlikely to repeat that success, particularly in Nevada, a state no Republican has won since 2004. But right now, Trump is on track to flip Nevada, a state he narrowly lost by just 2 points in both previous elections. In the Midwest, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania are absolutely critical for the Harris campaign. But if she's barely scraping by in New York, these 3 states are the least of her concerns. These were the battlegrounds that pushed Joe Biden over the edge in 2020, but let's not forget, back in 2016, Trump flipped all 3 states red for the first time in nearly 30 years, delivering him the presidency over Hillary Clinton. These states were razor-thin in 2016, but this time I see Trump winning by more than 2 points in each of them, including Michigan, which is typically the most liberal of the 3. If New York is only leaning toward Harris, the Midwest will likely break solidly for Trump. At this stage, Trump's victory is practically sealed. He's already beyond the 270 electoral votes he needs. But let's not stop there. There are still more states ripe for flipping. The remaining states are going to be tight, with margins of 2 points or less, putting them in the tilt category. First, Nebraska's 2nd district. Trump is poised to take it back without much resistance. Then there's New Hampshire. Back in 2016, Hillary Clinton barely held on, winning by a razor-thin margin of 0.37%. No one expected New Hampshire to be competitive, but it nearly went red. This time, if New York is decided by a lean margin, Trump will absolutely flip New Hampshire. It's not a question of if, but when. Now, Virginia, Biden won this state by 10 points just 4 years ago, but things have shifted dramatically. Virginia is far more conservative today than it was when Biden took office. In 2021, just a year after his inauguration, Republican Glenn Youngkin stunned everyone by winning the governor's race, defeating Democrat Terry McAuliffe.
This was the first statewide Republican victory in Virginia in over a decade. The state is undeniably shifting to the right, and Trump is in prime position to capitalize on that momentum after years of Republican struggles. Let's turn on to the Minnesota, the home state of Tim Walz, Harris' running mate. While Biden won Minnesota by percentage of 7 in 2020, Hillary Clinton nearly lost it in 2016 with only slim percentage of 1.5 margin. Minnesota, like much of the Midwest, is shifting right. Just look back to the 2012, when nearly the entire region was blue, even Indiana was blue in 2008. That's ancient history now. The Midwest has become a battleground for Republicans, with the states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota all taking a hard right turn. Meanwhile, some belt states are gradually drifting left, but Minnesota is far from safe. Even with Tim Walz on the ticket, Minnesota is ending but guaranteed for Harris. In fact, it is one of the most competitive states in the country, despite not going red in over 50 years. But if New York is close, Trump could make history and flip Minnesota red for the first time since 1972. And let's not forget about New Mexico and Maine. Biden won both decisively in 2020, but the landscape is shifting. While I still have Harris as a slight favorite in both, they are nowhere near as blue as they were last cycle. So, here is the 2024 election map, and this is best case scenario for Trump. The biggest takeaway is that New York is going to be far more competitive than anyone expects. At the very least, Harris is said to be weakest Democrat candidate in the Empire State since 1988. If she only wins New York by a lean margin, Trump is on the track for the 340 electoral votes, while Harris wouldn't even crack 200. The election in November will apparently be very exciting. And guys, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like the video and turn on the notification bell. See you in next video.